Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. And you'll never miss a story again. I always believed that if I did everything right, if I loved well, worked hard, and kept my promises, then things would hold. That family could weather anything if its foundation was made of effort and intention. For most of my life, that seemed to be true. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old, a critical care nurse, a husband, a father. I've spent the last 16 years watching life hang by threads, sometimes stitching it back together. Other times, holding the hand of someone who couldn't be saved. It's a job that teaches you how fragile we are, but also how fiercely we can endure. At home, I wore a different uniform. Soft clothes, jokes at the dinner table, kisses on foreheads. I loved my wife, Julia, with a quiet steadiness. I loved our two daughters, Sophie and Natalie, with something deeper than language. And I believed I was loved in return. I didn't suspect anything, not at first. It was the little things that started to fray the edges. A pause too long before answering. A softness in her voice that was missing. Then came the weekends, where she'd visit her sister and come back subdued, like she'd been somewhere far away, not just 20 minutes down the road. Her sister's husband, Mark, was a guy I tolerated more than liked. He was one of those men who spoke with certainty, even when he was wrong. A financial advisor with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. I always thought he played a role at family gatherings. Now I realize how much I didn't want to see. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the truth knocked me sideways. I had a rare day off. Julia thought I was on a double. I stopped by the house to grab some forms I'd forgotten. When I walked in, the silence was heavy. Her phone was on the kitchen table, unlocked. The screen still lit up. I didn't mean to look. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But there it was. Messages. Dozens. Not just flirtation, though there was plenty of that. It was the intimacy in their words that winded me. Jokes they shared. Plans. A weekend when she said she was at a retreat. She was with him. Mark, my brother-in-law. I sat down on the floor, just sat there. My hands were cold, my mind sprinting in circles. But I was still. I don't know how long I stayed like that. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't yell, didn't demand. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I might become if I did. My daughters were upstairs. Sophie had a math test the next day. Natalie was rehearsing lines for her school play. They didn't ask to be born into this mess. Instead, I stood at the bathroom sink and looked at myself. Really looked. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't recognize the man staring back. I thought about my father. How he'd walked out when I was 8. How my mother had worked 3 jobs and never once asked for pity. I promised myself back then I'd never be the kind of man who disappeared. So I didn't. I made breakfast the next morning. I kissed Julie on the cheek. I took Sophie to school and told her she'd do great on her test. I helped Natalie with her lines, and inside, I started to build a different kind of plan. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity, dignity, a way forward that didn't leave scars on my children. I started documenting, quietly, conversations, her movements, patterns. I wasn't gathering ammunition, I was gathering truth. For court, maybe. Or just for myself. I didn't know yet. 1 week later, I met someone I hadn't seen in a while. Emily, Julia's sister, Mark's wife. We ran into each other outside a coffee shop. She looked thinner than I remembered. Hollow. We hugged, and I felt her rib cage through her coat. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I needed someone to understand. Maybe I hoped she already knew. I know, I told her. Just those 2 words. She blinked, confused. Know what? I didn't answer. I just looked at her. Her face changed slowly, like clouds rolling across the sky. It wasn't surprise I saw. It was recognition. She knew too. We sat on a bench, hands in our laps, and talked for 2 hours. She'd suspected for months. Had even asked Mark once, point blank. He denied it, of course, but his phone was always locked. his hours suddenly longer. She'd felt herself shrinking. It was strange, sitting there with someone who had every reason to hate the same people, but neither of us wanted destruction. We just wanted to protect what we still had, our children, our peace. So we made a pact. We would not confront them yet. We would prepare for legal separation if it came to that, for the conversations we'd need to have with our kids. We would not let anger make the decisions. We would lead with love, even if our hearts were breaking. In the weeks that followed, I started seeing a counselor. I told him everything about the betrayal, the silence I was keeping, the plans I was making. He asked me why I hadn't left yet. Because I need to know I did this right, I said. Julia didn't suspect the thing. She was distant, yes. Guilty, maybe. But not afraid. And that told me all I needed to know. She thought she was in control of the narrative. She thought she could slip through the cracks. One night I found her crying in the kitchen. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would say something. Tell the truth, she didn't. She just wiped her eyes and told me she was tired. I told her to get some rest. I washed the dishes. I sat on the couch until the house went quiet. It was Emily who first said the words out loud. We have to tell them. She meant the kids. She meant the truth. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not until the legal groundwork was in place. I started meeting with a lawyer. I asked about custody, about asset protection, about keeping the home stable for Sophie and Natalie. The lawyer asked if I had evidence. I handed him a folder. Photos, messages, call logs, dates. He nodded slowly. You're doing this the right way, he said. That didn't make it hurt less. One night I took a long drive to the coast. The waves were loud, the wind sharp. I sat in the car and thought about who I used to be. The man who believed love was enough, who believed loyalty was its own kind of protection. I wasn't that man anymore, but I wasn't broken either. I thought of Sophie's laughter, Natalie's singing voice. I thought of my patients, how some of them had died with grace and others had clung to life with astonishing strength. That's who I wanted to be, someone who clung to the good. I drove home with a new kind of quiet in my chest, not peace, not yet, but resolve. When I walked in, Julia was asleep on the couch. The television flickered in the dark. I looked at her face, the woman I had shared half my life with. I remembered our wedding, the birth of our daughters, the Christmas mornings and beach vacations and late-night arguments. I still loved her. Maybe I always would. But I also knew she had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The day I told Julia I wanted to talk, it was raining. That slow, steady kind of rain that feels like it might go on for days. She was making tea in the kitchen, her back turned to me. The kettle hissed softly, like it too was waiting for what was coming. I said her name. She turned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, I know, Julia. Her hand froze halfway to the cup. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't deny it. She just stood there. The silence between us stretched wide and deep. I kept going. I told her I knew about her and Mark, that I had known for a while, that I hadn't spoken because I didn't want to cause chaos, not for her, not for the girls, that I'd needed time to think, to plan, to make sure this didn't become a wildfire. She sat down slowly. I don't know what she expected. Fury, maybe. Accusation. I gave her neither. Only truth. She apologized. She said she never meant to hurt me, that it hadn't been about love, that it had been a mistake that became something she couldn't control. Words spilled from her in half-formed sentences. She was crying now, and I didn't interrupt. When she stopped, I asked her one question. Did you ever think about what this would do to them? To our daughters? She nodded, eyes wet. Every day. That answer hurt more than if she'd said no. I told her I had spoken to a lawyer, that I was ready to begin the separation process, that I wouldn't shame her publicly, wouldn't drag her through anything unnecessary. But I would protect our daughters. I would protect myself. She agreed. Too quickly, maybe. Like part of her was relieved the lie had ended. Over the next few weeks, we started untangling our lives. Quietly, respectfully. We told the girls we were separating, but we didn't tell them why. They were hurt, of course, confused. But we were gentle. We spoke in calm voices. We told them we both loved them, and always would. That some things between adults change, but our love for them never would. Later, in private, I wrote each of them a letter. Something they could read when they were older, when the questions came. I wanted them to know the truth, without bitterness, without poison. Emily and I stayed in close contact. Her children were younger, but they sensed things too. One night she called, her voice trembling. "He moved out," she said. "Are you okay?" She paused. "Not really, but I will be." I started spending more time with my daughters. I rearranged my shifts to be home for dinner. We played board games, baked cookies. On Sundays, we went to the park and fed ducks. I tried to rebuild our little corner of the world, brick by brick. Sometimes Julia joined us. She was still their mother. I didn't want to sever that bond, and she tried, she really did. I could see it in the way she watched them laugh, in the quiet moments when she'd look at me and almost speak, but didn't. One night after the girls had gone to bed, she sat beside me on the porch. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. But I also told her that trust, once broken, doesn't come back the same way. She nodded. "I was scared," she said, scared of how ordinary everything felt. I didn't know how to talk about it, and then I just drifted. I didn't offer comfort. I just listened. Because that was part of healing, too. Emily and I met every Tuesday afternoon at the same little coffee shop. We talked about logistics, divorce papers, housing, finances. But we also talked about the ache, the betrayal, the slow rebuilding of self. "It's like learning to walk again," she said one day. "Everything feels unfamiliar." I understood. The future we had imagined had cracked open. But inside that fracture, something new was beginning. A life we could shape intentionally, carefully. By spring, Julia and I had filed the paperwork. She moved into a townhouse nearby, close enough to share custody, far enough for space. We told the girls together, again in soft voices, again with care. Emily's divorce took a little longer. Mark resisted. He didn't want to lose his image, but eventually he agreed to a settlement. She kept the house. More importantly, she kept her dignity. One afternoon, Emily invited me over. The kids were playing in the backyard. We sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out between us. "We should write something down," she said, and a guide maybe, for the kids, about our values, about what we want them to remember from all this. So we did. We wrote about resilience, about forgiveness, about boundaries and love, and how to stand tall when you've been knocked down. We wrote about truth, about not hiding from it, even when it's painful. It became our project. A family legacy not of bitterness, but of strength. Some evenings I still sit alone and think about what happened. The silence in the house feels heavier now. But it's a clean kind of silence. Honest. One night, Natalie crawled into my lap while I was reading. She looked up at me and said, "You're always here, Daddy." I kissed the top of her head. "I always will be," I said. That promise means more now than it ever did. The healing came slow. Some days I felt like I was making progress. Other days, the grief would hit me out of nowhere. A song on the radio, an old photo tucked in a drawer. But I let myself feel it. I didn't run. Because part of surviving is honoring the pain without letting it define you. At work, I found new purpose. I listened more closely to families sitting beside hospital beds. I understood their fear, their hope, their quiet resilience. I carried my own pain in my chest, and somehow, it made me better at easing theirs. Emily and I stayed close. Not romantically, just two people who had walked through the same fire and come out on the other side. We became co-anchors for our families. We kept the holidays simple. No forced cheer, just presence. There was one night, late in the summer, when we sat with all the kids on the back porch. Fireflies blinked in the grass. The kids were telling stories and laughing. Emily looked at me and smiled. "They're okay," she whispered. And they were. Because we had chosen not to pass down the pain. Because we had chosen to protect what mattered most. Because we had done the hard thing, the right thing, when it would have been easier to rage. That's not weakness. That's strength. And it became our legacy. Time has a strange way of healing and reminding at the same time. A year passed, then 2. And yet, some mornings, I'd still wake up and feel the echo of everything. The house was quieter. My daughters were taller, and I was still learning who I was without the life I thought I'd have. But there was peace in the routine. My work as a critical care nurse remained demanding, but I'd found something steadier in it. A way to serve, and in that, to heal myself. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you've lived through heartbreak. You stop taking small things for granted. A good cup of coffee. A patient's hand held in the dark. The way Sophie leaves little notes on the fridge when she goes to school. How Natalie hums while brushing her hair. I still see Julia regularly. Co-parenting is its own kind of delicate rhythm. We've built boundaries, not out of anger, but out of respect. She's more present with the girls now. There's guilt in her eyes sometimes, but also effort. And I do see the mother in her still. That part never left. We keep our exchanges brief, kind, polite, but honest. She once thanked me for not tearing everything apart, for being gentle with the truth. I didn't say much back, just nodded. What could I say? That I still felt the sting. That some nights I still asked myself why. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a long, uneven road. And I've chosen to walk it slowly. Emily and I still meet every other Tuesday. We've started volunteering together at a local outreach program for families going through separation. We sit in circles with strangers who share their own stories, some messier, some softer, and we offer what little wisdom we've earned. Sometimes all people need is someone who has been through the storm and didn't sink. One evening after a session, Emily said something I still think about. We're not the same people we were, and that's not a bad thing. She was right. Pain changes you, but it also reveals you. That fall, I finally took Sophie on the camping trip I'd promised her for years. We packed too much, forgot the matches, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. Sitting by the fire, she asked me if I was happy now. I paused, and then I said, "I'm learning to be." She smiled and leaned her head against my arm. "That's enough," she whispered, and maybe it was. Natalie started writing songs, little melodies that she'd hum while doing chores or walking around the yard. One night, she played one for me on the old keyboard we almost donated. "It's about being strong," she said shyly. She didn't know the half of it. Both girls had grown in ways I couldn't have predicted. They were still tender, still kind. But there was a resilience in them too. Like they had learned early that people are flawed, and that love, even when fractured, can still show up in meaningful ways. In time, I started dating again. Slowly, cautiously. Not because I needed someone to fill a gap, but because I realized that I deserved joy too. I met Claire at a community book event. She worked in elder care. Quiet, thoughtful, sharp-witted. We talked about everything except the past. We didn't need to compare wounds to understand each other. With Claire, there was no rush, no expectations. She met the girls only after a long while, and even then, just as a friend at first. I wanted them to feel safe, to know they were the center of this story, not footnotes. Julia and I talked before that meeting. I told her out of respect. She thanked me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe sadness, maybe closure, but she said she hoped I found happiness. That meant more than I expected. Mark faded from the picture. Emily told me he moved states, started over somewhere new. He sees his children on occasion, but the connection is thin. She doesn't speak of him much anymore, and I don't ask. Some chapters close with quiet, and that's okay. Eventually, Emily published something, a short book for children going through parental separation. It was simple, gentle, and honest. She dedicated it to the ones who choose love even when it's hard. She asked if she could include a note from me at the end. I wrote one paragraph. I want you to know that families don't break. They change. And even when they change, the love that holds them can still be strong. You are not alone in this. You are loved. Always. We printed a few dozen copies and donated them to schools and shelters. It felt like a small thing, but meaningful. Like planting something in soil you once thought barren. By the third year, everything looked different. The house, the routines, the shape of my life. But it didn't feel broken anymore. One evening, I stood by the window, watching the girls race each other through the yard. Sophie was shouting something about ice cream. Natalie tripped and rolled into the grass, laughing. In that moment, I felt it fully. Not just survival, but strength. Not just acceptance, but peace. The betrayal didn't define me. The love I chose to give, even when it hurt, did. My sister and I often talk about legacy, not in the sense of money or property, but in what we leave behind and the people we love. We both chose not to use our pain as a weapon. We used it as a compass. Our children will grow up knowing that the world isn't perfect, that people make mistakes, that hearts break. But they'll also know how to forgive, how to speak truth with care, how to stand still when everything around you's falling, and how to rebuild. I don't know what the next chapter holds. Maybe more love, maybe more change. But I know I'll face it the way I faced this one, with dignity, with compassion, and with the quiet strength of someone who has walked through fire and chosen not to burn, but to become something stronger.